Hey, Sean, what do I need to do to share my presentation?
Oh, click on the share screen at the bottom. I
Okay.
normally just share the main screen. It's easier in case you have to switch or go to other windows or whatever. Mhm. We can see it.
Hey. Um, well, then I will get started. I am Debbie Furlong from the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment. And in the past 12 months, we have done a lot of surveying about our students to figure out what's working and what's not working. Um, and so I asked John for an opportunity to share with the whole community what all these different projects are and some of the high points that we've learned and information about how you can learn more about any one of them. There were 3 surveys actually done connected with COVID-19, but I'm talking about 4 today because there was one that was completed right before we went into lockdown to provide some good baseline. All 4 of these were implemented by other organizations. The National Survey of Student Engagement, or NSSE, did 2 of them, and SUNY administration did 2 of them. Students got the invitation to participate personally mailed to them, emailed to them from either an Oswego address and or signed off, from the provost or from the president. The responses were all either confidential or anonymous. I think there was 2 each. For 3 of them, students were asked multiple times to complete the survey. The NSSE is a big undertaking, the main NSSE. And so those students got like 4 or 5 reminders. The last one that I'll be talking about, we just sent one, and you'll learn more about that as we get into it. None of these surveys offered any kind of financial incentives. Anyone who's worked much with survey data in higher ed knows that there's always going to be gender bias present. Women are much more likely to participate in surveys than men. Other than that, we didn't have any problematic, well, even the gender bias was not really a problem for the data. In cases where gender matters, we have to pay attention to that. So these surveys had really representative response groups, and we understand where the biases are. So we had good data. All 4 of these were approved by IRBs. NSSE works with Indiana University out in Bloomington, and SUNY works with different human subjects committees across the comprehensives. I did not put any of these through Oswego's IRB because our university doesn't intend to use this data for generalized research. Our responses from our students were just using to improve our own programs here on campus. So it's a bit of a nuance there. But they are IRB'd and the research is used nationally. And I don't know what SUNY plans to do with it. So this is the worst slide we're going to look at today because it lays out just some of the main descriptive differences of these 4 projects. The National Survey of Student Engagement, the NSSE, is a project that we do every 3 years. And we last did it between February and the sort of middle of March in 2020. So this was really pre-COVID. We had probably 50 students who responded to the survey after we went into lockdown. And NSSE did do a great deal of analysis about post-lockdown responses, and there's no real need to correct for that bias. The 2020 NSSE had 480,000 respondents. It involves 601 different institutions. We get back data comparing ourselves at Oswego to other schools across the SUNY that are like us, and then other schools nationally. It's a really well-done instrument. The NSSE is huge. It's very long. I just wrote 100 plus. It may have over 200 questions. It's very long and it's very broad. It covers many aspects of student experiences. It does only look at the experiences of freshmen, new entering freshmen, and seniors on their way out. So it's how did the first semester go for students, and then how are their experiences looking back over the whole period of their enrollment. And we had a great response rate. 27% of those invited did it, and over 800 respondents. The next survey that went into the field is the SUNY Student Remote Instruction Survey, or the RIS. This survey went into the field for Oswego on May 20th, and we completed it and wrapped it up on June 8th. So this was after the spring 2020 term. This was a product that SUNY developed, and they administered it to over 63,000 students from 44 different schools across the system. It had about 25 questions, really focused on how students experience the shift from traditional instruction to remote instruction and having to move home in the middle of the semester. We surveyed all students, and we had almost 2,500 respondents. This survey had a couple of reminders. I want to say 3 that we went out with. Huge number. I mean, we can draw wonderful conclusions from this instrument. When students came back in the fall, early on in the fall, like September, I started seeing information from NSSE. NSSE was recruiting schools to participate in a project that they referred to as the Pulse, taking the pulse of students very quickly. The purpose of the Pulse was to focus on how students were experiencing the fall 2020 term because of the COVID-19 restrictions. NSSE said they were doing this for free, and we have great experience with NSSE. So I very excitedly signed us up, and we went into the field right before Halloween, and we did 2 reminders. We did the survey invitation and 1 reminder. And out of that, I had an 11% response rate with over 700 respondents, which was plenty to get me down to like a plus minus 3% confidence interval, which is, I didn't want to pester the students anymore. The Pulse ended up having 190 institutions participated. There were 3 in SUNY that participated. It was us, Brockport, and it escapes me right now what the 3rd one was. The Pulse was really taking a pulse. It was 20 questions about students' experiences in the fall of 2020, especially related to COVID. The beauty of the Pulse, to me, is that there's a panel of items on it that match the regular NSSE survey. So we could compare our freshmen in 2020 who came in and had this bizarre COVID experience to the experience of our fall 19 freshmen who had a very traditional, what we would consider normal kind of experience. So it was an opportunity I wasn't about to overlook. Shortly after we went into the field with our Pulse, literally around October 27th or 28th, SUNY, the chancellor at SUNY decided that SUNY needed to do a system-wide survey of students. They quickly put it together and they put it in the field, and it's being referred to as the Student Satisfaction and Plans Survey. We did not have a choice but to do this survey, even though it was largely redundant for the 3 schools that had just completed the Pulse. They ended up with 33,000 respondents. All 61 schools participated. It has about 20 questions related to their experience, but also included a set of items about their plans for the future, which is something that the Pulse did not include. We only sent one invitation for students to do this. As you can see, it was going into the field right as our students were trying to wrap up and go home, because we sort of finished up the on-campus part of our fall during this period. And there was just so much going on. And we had a very good response rate, so we decided not to pester them anymore. So let's look at the RIS. These are some selected RIS findings. What I've pulled out here is SUNY's overall responses to Oswego's overall responses. How satisfied were you, or the percent of students who expressed that they were satisfied with academic instruction before the transition is very high for us and SUNY-wide. Satisfied with academic instruction after the transition, everybody falls, but you can see that the students at Oswego seemed to suffer a bit more than their peers across the system. This drop from 88% to 54% is an area that I really focused my follow-up research on. So I'm going to talk to you more about that on the next slide. There's, a few items here. This next item, how satisfied were you with support provided by the college for the transition? Again, Oswego seems to come in a little bit low compared to SUNY overall. And it's hard, or really almost impossible, to determine, is that because we have a different population? We do have a fairly unique population amongst the comprehensives. Or did we really drop the ball on some things? The RIS asked students, did you study as many hours before the switch versus after the switch? Oswego has the same number of students who said they studied more, 49% versus 48%. We also have kind of a bit more students who said they studied less, 32%. That's something else that I looked at. The RIS asked students whether they feel they have fallen behind in their academic progress due to the transition. Again, we're coming in a little bit high, and I've done some follow-up with that. The RIS asked if students felt like engagement with professors is playing a role, or responsibilities at home is playing a role. We're similar, students are concerned about those things, but it's no different here really than anywhere else. Tremendous numbers of students have indicated, this is no surprise to anyone, that the pandemic has made their financial situation a bit more stressful, a bit. Among students who are unsure about returning in the fall, the survey asked how important if we're all going to be on remote, is that what would tip your mind, or does the mode of instruction not really impact you? And you can see 77% of students from Oswego who were unsure about returning for the fall, which was a fairly small percentage. But of those, 77% said, yeah, whether or not we're going to be remote is the thing that they were waiting to find out about. I said that I was really interested in this difference between students saying they were satisfied with academic instruction before the transition versus after the transition. This graph on the left-hand side, the powder blue, less green bars show that really the majority, not the majority, but the most students were very satisfied with academic instruction before the transition. After the transition, it fell down to 10% who were in that very satisfied group. The big growth was in the dissatisfied and the very dissatisfied groups. What I decided to do was to look at each student's responses to those two questions and calculate a measure that I'm referring to as lost quality. So if a student was very satisfied before and now they're satisfied, I put them in this one level down group. So 42% of our students were as satisfied both before and after the transition. About 31% fell one category down, then see close to 20% and about 5% fell down 2 levels and 3 levels respectively. This variable of lost quality is an area that I really focused on. I wanted to know what explains which students perceived that they had the most lost quality. So here are some of the things that correlate with that measure of lost quality. We almost always look at gender first, men and women, and in this survey, all 4 of these surveys operationalize gender as a bivariate measure. Well, this is not a sophisticated look at gender in a full-fleshed way. It's just sort of a high skimming the top. Having said that, 58% of the students who said they lost the most on those quality measures were men, compared to only 41% of those who maintained quality. This was a significant difference. That men really perceived that things got a lot worse. Underrepresented minorities did not differ. They actually are slightly less likely to have lost quality compared to non-URM students, which is wonderful. Our underrepresented students face so many other challenges that at least they did not perceive that what was happening during the close down in the spring was impacting their instructional experience any worse than non-URM students. One of the barriers that the RIS asked about is study space. And this has turned into a huge national discussion, is whether or not students have adequate study space. Do they have access to a quiet, appropriate place to do their academic work? Students who faced major problems accessing adequate study space lost the most. You can see the difference there. 47% of those with high losses faced major problems compared to only 17% of those who maintained quality. The RIS asked about several different student services. In general, across the board, for all of these, the students who reported the most lost quality had slightly or significantly worse experiences with student services. The best example that has the strongest difference is academic advising. Students that had poor or below average experiences with academic advising, that was highly correlated with this perception of losing instructional quality. Our studying, I mean, this kind of cracks me up, but fewer hours studying correlates with more quality lost. Oh my God, they're doing it to themselves. 47% of students who lost the most quality studied less after the transition, compared to only 27% of students who had their quality maintained. I laugh, but it really isn't funny. When I think about why students are studying less, I don't think it's because they don't care. I think it's because they either didn't know how to engage in a remote world, or the rest of their lives were so complicated that they could not devote the time to studying. Finally, the last correlation I'll mention is among the students who reported that they were falling behind. Those with poor engagement had very high rates of overall lost quality. Let me talk a little bit more about that. About a quarter of our respondents said that they studied more, but they still felt like they were falling behind. Here's how they explained why they were falling behind, what they perceived as causing them to fall behind. And students could pick more than one of these. It was a yes or no kind of thing. 81% of these students who were studying more said they were falling behind anyway because of increased responsibilities at home. So that's complexities of their life. 74% did cite a lack of engagement with professors. Just a little over half referred to the fact that they are facing academic requirements that could not possibly be completed remotely, such as an internship that they had hoped to complete or something like that. And then 39% cited technical issues, such as not having a computer, or having to do their entire semester on telephone, or not having good Wi-Fi, those kinds of things. So the takeaways for the RIS, this work on the barriers that students face, it really became very clear looking at the data that the college can only remove those barriers for students by having students return to campus. Students who don't have enough to eat, who don't have study space, it's just very hard for us to provide those things to students living in 7,000 different homes across the state. The RIS students indicated that they preferred, in general, the majority of them wanted to return to campus for fall. These student responses, this information was available and was being reviewed by the President's Council at the time we were pushing to make our decision about what we would be doing in the fall. Regardless of what was gonna happen, the students expressed that they really wanted to know as much as possible, as early as possible. The open-ended comments on the RIS done back in May talked a lot about communication, things that they didn't know, things that they learned one way and then it was changed. And a lot of that is just unavoidable. But it is something that we've tried as a campus to address in the fall, to try to be very clear, to try to make decisions as quickly as possible, communicate the outcome of the decision once, and not mix messages. It's a hard thing because it's a quicksand environment.
So far, students want to know as much as possible.
Another thing that really came out of the policy, of the open-ended comments, I'm stuttering because I'm hearing just somebody talking in the background. I'm just going to avoid that, ignore that. Another thing that came out in the open-ended comments has to do with consistency of treatment. Students wrote about how their one professor handled the shift to remote instruction differently than another instructor, or one class allowed them to take a pass-fail and the other class didn't. This kind of inconsistency or different consistencies is really hard on students, and we really just can't over communicate. That was one of the takeaways, is we just really can't communicate too much, even though we feel like maybe you were talking to them and sending too many messages. We just probably weren't. So we went through the summer, we came back in the fall. The NSSE offered this free survey and I said, yes, yes, yes. I think I've already mentioned that there's really two big types of questions on the polls. There were a few items that were specifically focused on COVID, and then many items come from the regular NSSE, enabling this direct comparison. Overall, our students' responses to how they felt and their experiences generally match the nationwide responses that NSSE has released so far. NSSE hasn't done a large final report out yet. This survey was in the field for some of the institutions up into the middle of December, I think. So they just haven't wrapped that up yet. Some of the preliminary stuff that's out are, our answers are pretty much the same as every other school. There's not an area it's like, oh my God, we suck on this or that. As we had already seen on the RIS, this study space really jumps out. This is true for us and true nationally. Here's a couple of items that the Pulse asked about. They asked students, and I've cited here, the percent of students who have strong agreement with these different attributes of things that you need to get your work done. So strongly agree that the internet service has been sufficient, 41%. That's pretty good for strong agreement. Hardware and software has been sufficient, 46%. Again, that's very good. Study space has been sufficient, 29%. That's a lot less. These items do, as you can imagine, correlate or differ between students who live on campus and those who live off campus. But even students who live on campus have had study space issues. About 2/3 of our respondents said that the institution has worked very much or quite a bit to keep students safe and healthy, which is very good news. I mean, this is what we're trying to do, and we actually were doing it. And that's an item where our students' responses are pretty much in line with the preliminary overall Pulse data. The Pulse asked students if they were concerned about understanding the health policies that they had to comply with. So they asked about a student's own ability to comply and other students' compliance with health policies. As you might expect, students are more concerned about other students' compliance than they are with their own ability to comply. What was interesting to me, though, is that 50% is pretty darn high. 50% of our students are concerned about their own ability to comply with the health policies, which would be social distancing, wearing a mask, periodic testing. 38% of students who lived off campus picked the highest possible answer, the very much concerned about other students' compliance with health policies. Living on campus really does keep students safer. As an aside, those of you here on campus who know me know that I've been involved with tracking the campus's COVID positive rates. And Oswego had two big peaks. Right at the beginning, we had a peak, and then after Halloween, we had a peak. And when we divide that second little peak between on-campus and off-campus, it becomes so clear how much safer our on-campus students were. Once our students who lived on campus got on campus and got clear of COVID infection, they pretty much stayed clear. Almost all of our post-Halloween peak was amongst off-campus students. So yeah, they don't know how to keep each other safe. As I've been saying, the thing that makes a researcher's mouth froth about the NSSE is being able to compare two different groups of students. So I'm able to compare this fall's freshmen to last fall's freshmen, and this fall's seniors to last fall's seniors. I'm just going to describe the items that I decided to pull out here and some of the overarching themes. One of the overarching themes is, in many respects, freshmen do not know what they were missing. So it's like, they don't look that bad compared to last year's freshmen. Seniors, on the other hand, I think had a very clear understanding of what they were missing and what they were missing out on. So the first thing I pulled out there's an item that students respond on a 7-point scale. To what extent did your coursework this fall challenge you to do your best? What I pulled out here is students who picked a 6 or a 7. Man, I'm really doing my best. You can see that only 31% of our freshmen felt like they were being challenged to do their best, compared to 42% last fall. And the drop off for the seniors is even more dramatic. So this shift to remote instruction is somehow experienced by our students as a disconnection, being disconnected from whatever it is that makes them want to do their best and to feel like they're really doing their best. The next item, do you feel like your institution emphasizes providing academic support? Does your institution emphasize support for your overall well-being? Does your institution emphasize support for non-academic responsibilities? On all of these items, our freshmen are in line with last year's freshmen, or even higher for the overall well-being. The seniors, on the other hand, are dropping off some. The last set of items, there's 5 of them, all have that same 7-point Likert scale response pattern. And again, I pulled out the percent of students that circle or selected a 6 or a 7. These items have to do with relationships. So students are asked to rate the quality of their relationships with their interactions with other students, with academic advisors, with faculty, with student service staff, and with other administrators. Where to start? For the students, this is one of the most troubling findings, I think. This loss of quality of inter-student relationships for both the freshmen and the seniors. The reason that I believe this is so concerning is because this item has a tremendously powerful predictive ability on retention. In the past, we have seen that students that build good relationships with other students in the freshman year are much more likely to be retained, all things being held equal. So dropping down to 39% for our freshmen, perfectly understandable, and yet really concerning. Whatever our first year experience folks are doing with these freshmen is working, huge percents of students feel they have a very good relationship with their academic advisors. And even for seniors, it pretty much was maintained. The last 3 items, faculty, student service staff, other administrators, are areas where you see the freshmen like, yeah, that's fine. That's the same as it was in the past. And seniors are like, yeah, no, this is not a good relationship. This is not a good interaction. And it's very, very sad. Seniors typically normally have extremely strong relationships with faculty, and knowing that they have not had that opportunity to build those relationships in their senior year is very, very sad. It's very, very sad. But it is what we have been experiencing. So a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, the NSSE added these 3 items that the research community has been referring to as the belongingness panel, or the belongingness items. This concept of an individual feeling like they belong to a larger organization, in this instance, a college, or SUNY Oswego, has become, it has a lot of cachet now. Whether or not it's going to bear out in research, to be really truly a useful predictor or not, it's a little early to say. But right now, there's a lot of focus on this concept of belongingness as the thing we need to pay attention to. So again, you can see our freshmen feel about as comfortable and as valued and as much a part of the community this year as last year. But again, our seniors have drifted off. So Debbie Furlong's takeaways from the fall pulse. In many ways, I think the data are pretty positive. At least it's not nearly as bad as it could have been. This loss of challenge is difficult to understand, especially given that we know that the students' fail rate is much higher. It's just, you know, I don't think we can understand what's really been happening in the teaching and learning environment through a survey. I think that faculty and qualitative experience would probably be required to really understand why students feel like they're not being challenged, and yet they are also more likely to be failing courses. As I mentioned, the loss of student-to-student relationships is concerning because it's historically been a good predictor of retention, and that creating study spaces and spaces for small groups to build relationships, figuring out how to do this is a big national talking point right now. Okay, moving on to the last project that we did, the Student Satisfaction and Plans Survey, or the Plans Survey. I'm going to highlight some of the kind of different questions that were on this survey compared to the other surveys. About half of the respondents to this survey said that they would have made a different decision about attending college in fall 2020 if they had known what it was going to be like. I don't know if even us telling them what it was going to, I mean, we didn't know what it was going to be like. You know, we ended up having to go on pause for 2 weeks. We had hoped and worked hard to avoid that, but it is heartening to know that our students were no more disappointed than the rest of the students across the system. About half of the students were very supportive of the increased COVID safety measures. I don't know if that's a good answer or not. Ideally, I would like all of them to be very supportive of increased COVID safety measures, but we know that's an unreal expectation for a lot of reasons. No matter what we do, we're not going to please everybody. This plans survey asked students what they would prefer to have happen in spring of 21. You want to go totally online or almost totally online? Do you want to have a mix, or do you want to go mostly or totally in person? Both at SUNY and at Oswego, about equal numbers across the board. We cannot please all the students, which is kind of devastating. I looked at students' levels of satisfaction with the mode of instruction and what their actual mode of fall instruction was. And this slide illustrates how complicated these experiences are. Students who were all online were most likely to be satisfied. Students who had a mix were most likely to be dissatisfied. And then, students who were mostly online, yes. And then this last group are people who had the most in-person instruction, and they're just right in the middle. I don't think we can draw any conclusions from this. I don't think that there is an overall relationship between the mode of instruction and student satisfaction with the mode of instruction. I think every course, every faculty member, and every student with his or her own sets of skills, barriers, and expectations determined whether or not that student was satisfied or dissatisfied. I looked at students' concern about COVID spreading in classes and whether or not that correlates with their preference for the spring. And it absolutely does. The biggest number of respondents regarding the level of concern is high concern. There were 266 respondents who said they had high concern about COVID spreading in classes, which actually we don't have any evidence that it actually did at Oswego, but they were concerned about it. 60% of those with high concern wanted all online classes in the spring. So they're concerned about getting sick in class. They'd rather stay home and do it all online. But the biggest single group of students is in that bottom left corner, that 174 respondents. They have low concern about COVID spreading in classes, and they want mixed, mostly or all in-person classes. So they're much more likely to want to have that interpersonal interaction. And even students who have a mixed feeling about COVID spreading would prefer to have more in-person interaction. So overall, 57% of our respondents said they want to have a mixed curriculum. They don't mind taking a little bit of online, but they are leaning towards mostly or all in person. And that's 57% of our student body, which is not like an overwhelming majority. Getting back to my, oh my God, we can't keep everybody happy concern. So not so many takeaways from this PLANS survey, which you may recall I wasn't really thrilled about us having to do anyway, but we did learn some stuff about it from doing it. We learned that our students are about as satisfied as those at other schools. Their feelings and experiences have been pretty similar, which is good. We're not going to be able to satisfy everybody in the spring. The other thing that, I don't know if this is a takeaway from the PLANS survey or just from me looking at all of this data. So I think that there are obviously some long-term implications of having exposed so many students to online courses. Students have options for what time of day they can take classes. They want options for which instructor they take. Is mode of delivery going to be a new kind of preference that students expect us to provide? Are they going to continue to really desire to have such a wide array of online options once the pandemic is controlled? At a school Oswego size, this gets to be very challenging because we have a fairly small number of classes that we have the faculty to deliver multiple sections of the same course. And even when we have the faculty who can do that, our curriculum is pretty broad. We don't have that many places in the curriculum where lots of students need to take the same course. So providing all the different options gets harder and harder. The last couple of slides that I put together are preliminary data, which I have not directly tied to the surveys. As I said at the beginning, 2 of these surveys were anonymous. The NSSE data do come back identified, so I can actually look at how students responded and what ended up happening with their grades. But just looking at grades, we can see that this fall semester was a beast for our students. This graph shows the distribution of fall grades earned by new freshmen, so new entering freshmen starting college for the first time. Got A's, B's, C's, S's, and P's. S and U are satisfactory and unsatisfactory. Those are courses that students are taking for credit, but the outcome will not impact their GPA. We also have P and F, pass and fail. Again, that's an option where passing the course earns you the credit, and failing doesn't, obviously. But it doesn't, the outcome of that course doesn't go into your GPA. The D's, and then here E's, the E is the failing grade on the A through E scale. F is the failing grade on the pass-fail scale, and U is the unsatisfactory or no credit option on the SU scale. Last fall, 8% of our freshmen, 8% of the grades awarded to freshmen were in this E, F, or U, compared to 16% this year. When I looked at continuing or transfer students, the increase is not as daunting, but it has increased from 4% to 8%. So even our continuing and transfer students had a tough go of it this fall. So how can you learn more? The Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, me, has done several analyses of the 2020 NSSE before COVID. Then I've done sort of a big wrap up of the RIS and the Pulse. I have not done any serious review of the Future Plans survey. This work has been used by the President's Council and other campus leaders, and it exists for you if you're interested in it. If you're a qualitative type, we have files of the students' open-ended comments. And if you're the kind of person that likes to read students' experiences in their own words, I can share those files with you. I know that many people don't like graphs and numbers, or that they like to complement graphs and numbers with students' experiences in their own words. So if that would be useful to you, that's available to you. If you want to get copies of stuff that we've already done about these surveys or of these files of open-ended comments, you can just send a little email to our office, ira@oswego.edu, or to me, Deborah.Furlong. Indicate which project you're interested in. So we've got the NSSE, the RIS, the Pulse, or the Future Plans. And maybe tell me a little bit about what it is you hope to learn, so that I can direct you appropriately. And then if you would like follow-up analyses on any of these things, you certainly can ask that. I would caution you that asking for program-based comparisons is very problematic. And I'm like, if you're like, well, I want to know how well the business program did, I may be able to do some of that. We do a lot of program comparison on the main NSSE, but that was before COVID. These post-COVID surveys are either anonymous or we haven't been asking students what program they're in, or we don't really have enough students to divide it down that far. So I just thought I'd mention that because one of the first things that people often ask for in follow-up is, well, how does my department compare? We did these special things and we want to know if it worked. So you can go ahead and ask, but I may not be able to really help. And I think that brings me, see if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen. That brings me to the conclusion of my 50-minute blah, 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 blah. I'm not sure, John, if these sessions need to end right now, in which case people can email me questions, or if we should be open for questions for these last 10 minutes. What's your preference?
We can have some time for questions. We do have to exit out to get the video rendering so we don't get a backlog later. But we can go another 5 minutes or so, maybe 6 or 7 even.
Does anyone have anything off the top? I know, I just did a 50-minute dump. So, if the fact that you're still awake is kind of a miracle. But
Debbie, this is Liz Joes. I have a question.
Okay.
I'll put my face there. Some people who do research, like in the medical field, expect that when people are in pain, things will be negative. Does that make sense?
No, I didn't hear it. They
Sorry.
expect it.
So people who do research like in the medical field or, like campus health or counseling centers, we've learned that when people are in pain or when they're sick, the bias is negative. So we've learned, like when I ran a counseling center, I learned how to ask things in a very concrete way. So how did counseling help you do such and such?
Mhm.
Not did your life improve or are you really satisfied? Because in fact, we don't control everything. So when you hear people talk nationally about these results, do you hear them talk about sort of this is an awful, anxious time for all of us? What does that mean in terms of that response bias?
I don't know if I've seen anyone address it as sophisticated as you just stated the proposition, Liz, but I can tell you that all of the national research is focused on the larger context of student mental health. The impact that the pandemic and the requirements for different ways of living and the disconnectedness between people, that is definitely seen amongst my colleagues and the research I'm aware of. That is seen as the context. That is the control variable, you know. I'm trying to think right now if any of these instruments asked students about anxiety and depression. I don't think they did. Putting, adding that in takes these instruments to a different level of oversight need in the IRB world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? You can either turn your mic on or type them in chat.
I'm just now opening up the chat and seeing what you guys have been writing about. A discussion about students just flat disappearing. And yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to end our session. I will let you know there are a few surveys coming in the spring that I know of. But right now, SUNY is not telling us that they're planning to do another big future plans kind of survey. The one campus-wide survey that I'm aware of is every 2 years, we do something called the SVP, Sexual Violence Prevention Survey, which they call the climate survey, but it is not at all. It is neither a set of questions about climate change, nor is it a set of questions about the climate for equity and diversity, which is how most people use the word climate. But this survey carries that label, and it's a set of items about sexual violence experiences. SUNY does do something called the Student Opinion Survey, or the SOS. They do that every 3 years. And SUNY is talking about doing it this spring, but it's still a little bit on the table. The institutional researchers are very hopeful that they will, because there's a lot of assessment data that we get out of that survey. But our students have been surveyed, so they may hold off for a year. And again, I want to thank all of you for giving me an hour of your time. Many of you I know are in the classroom, and I cannot begin to tell you how much respect I have for what you have done and what you are doing. I am in awe. And the national research on the demoralization of the faculty is just so hard to read. And if I can give you a hug, I would, but all I can tell you is how much I respect what you're doing. And thank you on behalf of our students. Thank you, thank you.